So why this topic? Multiplayer is a big thing on mobile nowadays. If you look in top grossing charts, you will notice that 7 out of 10 games in US App Store are actually real-time PvP titles. That means there's a big audience, an audience willing to pay in these games. So it's not a big surprise that there are around 20 games in the list of Pocket Gamer, which covers games in soft launch, which are also PvP titles. At AppAgent, we are soft launching games very frequently, and currently we are managing 4 titles in a soft launch, Payday by Crime War, and then 3 more from startups and also established companies. But I also talked to 6 great experts, from product designers, CTOs, user acquisition experts, to mobile marketers, who all contributed to this talk. So my big thanks to these amazing guys. They made the talk very insightful, and it's because of their vast experience in this field. So let me ask you here, who of you was involved or is currently managing some game in soft launch? Hands up. Cool. And those of you managing multiplayer games? Perfect. So I will keep it brief here, just to lay down the framework which we'll use later on. So there are basically 3 main stages: technical, retention, and monetization stage. From the product perspective, you start in cheaper territories to test the technical stability of the game and how your analytics collect data. Then you move to usually tier 2, and if you have enough money on the account, then in some cases even to tier 1 countries to optimize your retention. And then the last stage is monetization, where you acquire larger volumes of users because you need statistically valid data to evaluate your payers and your monetization. You optimize the whole conversion funnel, and you also might tap into a live ops testing. From the marketing perspective, you start with testing your attribution provider. If there are payments verified, if your Facebook analytics collect all the data, you also start building the initial LTV model. As a market in the retention stage, you test unique selling proposition and test different ads, both formats and messaging. You optimize your store conversion, and in monetization stage, you usually expand your channels. So from the 2 most commons, which is Facebook and Google Ads, you might tap into video ad networks or even Snapchat, and basically test how these traffic sources drive users to your game. And also you start building the whole growth model and media plan for the launch. So this is the framework, and let's use the framework to talk about specifics of soft launching multiplayer games. So let's start with the technical stage. If you are starting, you should bear in mind one important thing, and that's that retention in multiplayer games is made by the PvP experience. What this actually means, until you fully optimize the game experience from player's perspective, so your heroes are well balanced, or cards, the maps are fully optimized, so there are no weak spots in the game design. If you optimize, things such as cheating and other things, you won't see good retention numbers. And compare this to launching a single-player game, let's say a match 3 with levels. You usually focus on the difficulty, on introducing new features, but that's it. It's quite easy. Whereas on multiplayer games, there are many unknowns. And also, the thing is that people are very unpredictable. So there might be cheaters. There might be people using some disbalances in your, let's say, weapons or cards, and they are leveraging this in their favor. So these are all things which you are not fully able to anticipate on the beginning, and you need to take this into account when you are planning how long you will spend in this initial stage and how much money you need to cover this from the user acquisition perspective. You should also avoid fragmenting the audience with new words, new maps, or too many game modes. I've seen many times in the past that developers offer players many game arenas on the beginning, or many ways how to spend the time in the meta. And the thing is that you should really push people to the waiting room and to the battle itself, not to fragment them across the game, because then you will face the issue of not having enough players to be matched in a short time, and it will cost you more money. Here's a screenshot from Payday Crime War by Starbreeze. This is just after I finished the onboarding. You can see there's only one mode available, nothing more. So this is the best practice you should follow. Next, very specific to multiplayer games are time zones and servers. The globe is usually split into 3 distinct territories: Asian, European, and the Americas. And developers have different approaches how to handle the issue that part of your audience is active, whereas the other part is still sleeping. So for example, in Payday, we are matching only players in that given zone. So someone from Japan can't play against an opponent in the UK. They're only matched within the same zone. Another thing is from the cost perspective that you need to open and maintain servers in all the territories, which is again very pricey, especially if you have a startup or you are an indie studio. This could be very cost heavy. So there are some countries where I can recommend to go, and some tactics. So let's start from Asia. The Philippines is usually the country where developers tend to technically test the game first, but then you might expand to Malaysia or Taiwan. And if you want to save some money and use this territory also for the other stages, you can then combine the acquisition in these cheaper territories and then acquire high-quality players willing to pay in countries such as the Netherlands, the New Zealand, or Australia. And the same applies for Europe. You can acquire players in the Nordics and match them with players in Romania or Czech Republic. And you can really optimize your budget by creating the liquidity in cheaper countries and then measuring, for example, your monetization KPIs only for the segment of users coming from tier 1 countries. Let's talk about the retention stage. I already mentioned that liquidity is king. And this is the single biggest difference between single and multiplayer games. If you have a game 1-on-1, it's not such a big deal. But if you have, let's say, 4-on-4, such as in Payday, then it starts to be really financially heavy to keep the stable level of daily active users to match players together in a short time. And then imagine, for example, Fortnite, 100 players in a single battle arena. So that's really a huge challenge, and it's quite complicated to achieve that. Another thing is that you as developers should try to keep the wait time as low as possible. For games 1-on-1, 10 seconds already start to feel pretty long. If the game is, let's say, 4-on-4, then usually players are more patient. But in general, as a rule of thumb, 30 seconds is the maximum. So that's, for example, why Heroes of Warland by Nitro Game cap the matchmaking to 30 seconds, and if there are not enough real opponents, then they fill the remaining slots with bots. Talking about bots, I have a second question for you today. Do you as players notice if you play against bots? Few of you. The thing is that experienced players, and especially if you play the game for a longer period of time, you basically notice. You notice some patterns. You see that the AI is approaching certain situations in the same way. And there are basically 2 groups of publishers. One, which is strictly against using bots in their games besides the first-time user experience. And that's, for example, Jiva with their Smashing 4. And then the other group where they fill the gaps with bots and basically avoid of having large number of daily active users and paying for them. In general, it fully makes sense to use bots for the first-time user experience because you can control the experience. You can explain how to play the game. You can keep the player in the game as long as you see that the player is learning and mastering the game. And once this reaches a certain level of experience, then you start matching the player with real opponents. There's a bottleneck in many games, and that's the transition from bots to real players. There's one game which we have in our portfolio called Glowing Gloves. It's an AR game, boxing AR games. You basically play on your device and you move like in a ring and you punch with your fingers. So it's combining your real movements with on-screen controls. And if you start playing it, you are playing against AI. So it's okay experience. But once there's a real opponent on the other side, then this novelty about the game basically creates an issue that the opponent is looking on the ground or turning backwards. So it feels awkward, and you immediately notice this is completely different experience. And that's very tricky part where players notice that something's different, and they might feel cheated if you are not fully transparent about using bots and real players. So, for example, Jiva with Smashing 4, they are strictly against this, and Miloš, the CTO and main designer of the game, mentioned that in case he would use bots, he'll be very transparent about this. Then the other developers tried to be exactly the opposite, and they tried to include some unpredictability, randomness in bots, and also create virtual identities by using real names, real photos. Warframe by About Fun even created a gameplay history of the bot and assigned bots to clans. So basically, it was very difficult to track whether the opponent you just played against is a human being or an AI. So this is very different. Yes, these are very different approaches, and it's up to you to decide which way to go. The thing is that the quality of bots of the AI directly correlates to your marketing budget. So if you have high quality of bots, you can save some money on your marketing. If you want to pursue the way as Jiva, so only real opponents, then you have to have enough money in the bank. The curve you are seeing is basically how many users you need to acquire to these different stages of soft launch. In the technical stage, you need only hundreds, maximum thousands of users. Then, when the retention stage comes, you need to do the initial boost, and then to keep the level of DAUs to evaluate the game performance and further optimize it. And for monetization stage, you usually need to even increase it to have enough payments and evaluate the performance in terms of spend. Now, you might have the question how to calculate this. So this is a simplified methodology, and I will then show you a specific example how to get there. So basically, you need to start with calculating how long players spend in the actual battle, how long they spend in the metagame, and then translates to some time of each loop when players come to the waiting room. Next, you calculate how many players you need to achieve high level probability they will be matched under, let's say, 30 seconds. And then that translates to your concurrent players. Then the daily active players are estimated based on the active time of day, number of sessions, and number of matches per session. And finally, using the retention curve, which you already might have from previous stages of the soft launch, or you just do some estimate, you can calculate how many users daily you need to buy. John, may I ask you for a bottle of water? Cool. So the example here. In this particular case, the gameplay is for 3 minutes each battle. The meta game about another 30 seconds. We want to keep the wait time below 30 seconds and to have 90% of matching probability, which translates to 100 concurrent players. Then we expect that the play time is between 8 to 11 p.m., 3 sessions a day and 3 matches per session, which results in 20,000 daily active users. And the last step, here's the retention curve. We expect organic uplift of 25%. And for this case, 3 months in soft launch, which translates to nearly 170,000 installs and another 30,000 organic. If we are optimistic about the CPI and use the average of $1.50 as an average between tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1 countries, this means that for 3 months in soft launch, we need $250,000. And that's a lot of money, considering that these numbers were pretty optimistic in terms of number of sessions and matches and retention. So you might ask how to optimize this, how to get lower, how to save some money. So let's look on the monetization stage when the game is, let's say, optimized from the retention perspective, but you need to even increase number of players to analyze the performance of the game. So the first tip is to tap into influencers. Actually, if your game has a streamable potential, it's fun to watch, then at this point of soft launch, it's already ready to be shown to the public through streamers. And you also would get a benchmark how the quality of traffic translates to your retention and monetization numbers and compares to previous acquisition campaigns on Facebook, AdWords, or video networks. It's better to pick a market which is specifics in language, for example, let's say Poland or Romania. In case something goes wrong, it will stay on the market and you are somehow covered. If you use a streamer from Canada or UK, then you can imagine that such video will be viewable all around the globe, and maybe you are not ready for that yet. This is Jirka Král, a streamer having over 1 million subscribers, and the game he's showing is called Smashing 4 by already mentioned publisher named Jiva, and he's famous for his streams of Clash Royale. And you can see from the gameplay that this is kind of similar, So it was a perfect match when Jiva approached Jirka with the request to get exposure on his channel. And this guy was able to generate with a single video 60,000 downloads with day one retention over 70%. So it was a great way how to save a ton of money for Jiva, and then they spent much less than I just calculated a few slides before, because this was the leverage they got from this amazing streamer. Another way how to save some money is to get to early access by Google. Google handpicks about 20 games which are still in, let's say, soft launch or development, and they can drive you about 300,000 downloads, which was the case of War Friends by About Fun, which is amazing. Basically created all the liquidity needed just from Google Play, and then About Fun could focus only on tier 1 countries and measure monetization on, let's say, iOS. You can limit countries in early access. You can do storytelling experiments. You can run paid UA, and people can't rate the game publicly, so you are really safe. So it's a perfect way how to save a very large portion of your budget. Next, you can try some events. There were several talks about live ops, so this is basically it. If you are short on money, using some like happy hours, double coins, or other tactics, initial tournaments, will help you to get people to the game over a short period of time, and in that period of time, you can measure the desired KPIs. Then The people will lapse, of course, but you don't have to spend so much if you're short on budget, so this is a great way how to optimize your spend. The last thing I want to mention is about communication. I've seen many times before that even great games, great PvP, real-time multiplayer games, weren't communicating this aspect clearly to their players. Actually, we've been involved in creating a couple of ad creatives for WoW Robots by Pixonic, where that was the case. And then we created the video I will show you now, which was exactly addressing this main aspect of the game, and I hope you will like it. We have no sound, but never mind. So you can see that we showed the teams, opponents. We even mentioned 6-on-6 in the infographics. We demonstrated the help of team when you are in troubles. So this was all about PvP. So keep this in mind, not only for your ads, but also for your store listing, because once people open the store, they look basically for keywords. Keywords such as 4-on-4, play with friends, or PvP team cooperation. They just want to be assured that this is the game for them, this is the game they love, the genre which they prefer to play. So 6 key takeaways for you. Secure enough money and time for the soft launch. You should manage expectations of your C-level executives or even your investors. Have enough time and money in the bank to get across the Death Valley, which is on the beginning of soft launching any PvP game. Once you have it, then you very likely would get to there sooner or later. The quality of bots defines your marketing budget. Be very honest about your specific game. If the AI is good enough so you can use bots to replace real players if you don't have enough of them. If not, then again, you need more money in the bank. You should calculate number of daily active users for each soft launch stage. It doesn't have to mean that you need, let's say, 20,000 from the technical or retention to monetization stage. For example, you can define specific number of DAUs for each game update. You are looking for, specific data point, which is not relying on so high number of daily active users. So be smart with this, play with this number, do your math, and you can save some money there. Very simple, but very important is to limit modes and meta to build liquidity. And the tips to save some money is to leverage cheaper countries, use events, and also tapping into influencers might help you. And last but not least, clearly communicate the PvP element in your ads, because that can increase your CTR and later on install rate, decrease the cost per acquisition, and again, save you some money. So thank you for attention. And I would like to invite Tim on stage, who will give a talk about Playable ads. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks to John and Peter and GDC for having us. Really excited to be here. My talk's called Playable Ads, 5 things we learned the hard way so you don't have to. My name's Tim Shepard. I'm responsible for all things playable ads at Wooga. So if you're unfamiliar with Wooga, we're a story-driven casual mobile games developer based in Berlin. We have 6 live titles, and they're in the hidden object and match 3 space. I'll be using examples from these games in this presentation. So the structure of this presentation will be, I'll go through some of our assumptions when we started looking into playable ads, and then letting you know about our findings, and we're going to touch on all aspects of playable ad creation. So design, production, publishing, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Just a quick note, there are some slides with lots of information. I won't go through all of it, but if you see that icon, just take a quick snap and analyze it later. So the evolution of in-game advertising, quick overview. 10 years ago, this is what in-game advertising looked like. Ugly banners just stuck in the corner of HUDs and over gameplay, not very sophisticated. Obviously, this developed into interstitial, full screen, video, and then, of course, rewarded video, which brought along the advent of ads as a good, significant revenue driver. And now we have interactive or playable ads, which we consider to be the next generation of mobile advertising. So by quick show of hands, who we got here? So who's more on the product side? So designers, UX guys. Okay, 1 or 2, 3 or 4. And who's marketing managers, UA side? Okay, all right, so pretty even. All right, this is going to be important later. Okay, so let's dive right in. Assumption number 1, it's going to be super easy. Playable ads are essentially little games, and we make games, so how hard can it be, right? So our assumption, it's going to be super easy. Our finding, it's not at all. It's really difficult. So what is even a playable ad? Depending on who you ask, you might get several different answers. Some people consider a playable ad should be a vertical slice, little pieces of the whole game. Some people believe it should be the first-time user experience in an ad format. And some people might think that cherry-picking the most interesting moments is where you want to be focusing your creative on. I believe it's kind of more like a sweet spot, right in the middle. It's a blend of all of them, and that you should be touching on all of these aspects within a playable ad. One of the reasons why I got so interested in playable ads is it's the first data-driven ad creative. Because it's software, we can integrate deep analytics and really, on a granular level, identify where a creative is not working or is working. This is compared to video, where you just publish it, put it out, and you get a handful of metrics at the end of a couple of weeks, and you don't really know if it failed. You don't really know where you actually lost your viewer. Because we can see all of this data per interaction, then, and we can get it all in real time, you can take your iteration per creative from weeks to literal minutes. So I will be talking a lot about data, and I'll be using this chart as a reference. It's a really simplified overview of the kind of analytics you might want to have in your playable ad, but just quickly walk through it so we know what we're talking about. First off is the request, how many people are asking for a playable ad, how many times that was actually loaded. First interaction rate, this means of the ad that was loaded, how many people realized they could touch it and then actually did. Of those who started it, how many completed it, and then how many people actually press click through to the app page. Then after that, further down the funnel, we have our standard creative reporting metrics, either about UA costs or how this cohort actually performed in the game. Also, playable ads are teeny tiny little things. They're really small. So in some cases, you need to have a playable ad which is less than 1 meg in size, all assets, all audio, everything. They're written in web languages. And if you're familiar with instant games on Google Play, I would just want to highlight that while I do believe there is a lot of overlap in how you'd produce these things, I consider them to be slightly different products. So hopefully there's a lot of transferable learnings, but do bear in mind, instant games are probably a bit of a different beast. Okay, so what did we hear about playable ads? Why did we get so interested in them? So there's a lot of people saying a lot of things about why playable ads were so cool and so exciting, and obviously we had to take notice. And while these were all fascinating for other companies, what we believed was, yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity here. And I'd love to be standing here right now and say, for sure, if you do a playable ad, you're going to get 20% uplift on your day 7 retention, or you're going to spend almost all your ad budgets on playable ads. I can't say that for sure right now, but the one thing I can say for sure that I know is that they are complex and expensive. But there's still a lot of opportunity in here, so let's dig into why. All right, assumption number 2, people are going to love playable ads. In reality, they need a lot of convincing. We'll focus on these first couple of metrics here, the in-game metrics, if you like. But first, a little audience interaction. Given the choice, By show of hands, would you like to hear a little bit more about the design best practices or a little bit more about production best practices? So hands up for design. There's a lot for production. Oh, okay, I didn't anticipate it'd be about even. Okay, we're definitely going to touch on both, but I'm going to lean towards the design side, all right? So it's more fun. There's more GIFs in this one. Okay, so for first interaction rate, as a benchmark, we would say anything between 50 and 90% is acceptable level for a workable playable ad. Now, the first thing for playable ads is you've got to consider your audience. There's a lot of assumed familiarity that we saw, but actually this is your player coming into a playable ad. They have no idea. There's no context. They didn't come from the Play Store. They didn't search for it. They probably saw it in a rewarded ad placement. And the game you're trying to sell is nothing like the game they were playing. So it's really, you've really got to acknowledge this fact. There's also the attention level. A lot of people hit reward give me a double reward and then tune out and go and make a cup of tea or something. So are they actually giving the brain power required to play a game rather than watch a video? And trust. Everyone knows not to click on ads on the internet. We're not stupid. So there's a lot of friction in getting people on board here. So here's an example of one of our first playable ads. It's a hidden object scene for Pearl's Peril, and we want people to touch the cake. So we highlighted the word cake, and we put the cake in the middle, and we put a big animated hand on the cake, and we just wanted them to touch the cake. And they didn't. So we had to iterate on this and try and figure out what can we do to make it a bit more obvious what you need to do. So this was our solution. It's not very pretty. We also added this big, sexy banner at the top. But the point is, it's not a time to be subtle. Really need to get people comfortable with letting them know you've got to do something. There are other nicer ways you can do this. You could just like little text hints, animated hints where people will, looping animated hints, actions which will progress if the player is idle, move them through the action. Okay, so now they started playing the game, how many people finish it? So all games designers are familiar with this principle, keep it simple, stupid. For playable ads, it's more like this, keep it extremely simple, stupid. Like, we cannot underestimate how accessible these things need to be and how much hand-holding is required. Every time we've worked on difficulty, we've been surprised that it's always the easier iteration which works. So for example, this is going to be different for every game, but obviously difficulty will be a place where you start to experiment. For us, 3 to 5 taps is what works best. So a bit shorter than you might expect, but this is how light things need to be. Also another example, so here's one of our scenes in action. Now on the left here, my right, your left, the orange objects indicate the sizes of the hidden objects if this was the game. For the playable ad, we made much bigger objects. So instead of the smudge on the window, find the window. So bigger is better, and don't be scared about simplifying your game mechanic to understand, to communicate how it needs to work. Always add a progression meter, so players know that if they start playing, they're not going to be there they're just there for a good time, not for a long time. And you can also play with simplifying the UI. So here we've removed the text and just put in silhouettes instead. Okay, win moments. Always make sure your ad ends on a big moment in a hidden object. This is when players find a clue, and it's a huge, exciting point that moves the story forward. We call this our wow moment, and my best practice is figuring out what the wow moment is I want to put in the ad, and then work backwards so I know where I'm going, so I can adjust the length there. Click-through rates, this is pretty standard, similar to video. So we've seen actually great uplift in terms of click-through rates on playable ads. Always put your logo everywhere, always put an install button everywhere. Always make sure your end card really pops and leads nicely into your Play Store package. And yeah, playable ads have not got the best reputation right now, but really do have to manage your expectations on what's possible. They are technically difficult to produce. Communicate the concept and not the details, and remember your goals. your goal is not to recreate the game verbatim. It's about getting an install. And then finally, work backwards from wow. Like, really make sure you're ending on a highlight. So those are best practices. Let's do a couple of worst practices. So here's a screenshot. It's an end card from a match 3 level. The player is given 2 options. Do they want to play again, or do they want to exit? In this case, it doesn't matter, because they both go to the App Store, which is great for your click-through rates, but it's, you're not going to have any happy players on the App Store page. So they're just going to be pissed off, and they're not going to play any more of your playables again, and more importantly, they're not going to play any of mine. So don't misabuse the trust that we're trying to ask for people here. There's another example, slightly more devious. There's a close button there that actually doesn't close the ad. That also goes to the App Store as well. And in general, don't overpromise. Make sure you're capable of reflecting your game accurately. Right, and that was our more design focusing. So let's jump into production. Right. Okay, assumption 3. It's just a mini game. It's going to be pretty straightforward. In actuality, it's a completely new dev pipeline. Another show of hands. How many people are considering making playable ads in-house, and how many are reflecting on considering outsourcing? So option A, in-house. Okay, and outsourcing. Okay. Slightly more for outsourcing, I think, so I'll just jump ahead here. Yeah, cool. Right, first, for production, for skills, you probably have Unity developers in-house. Can you use Unity to make playable ads? No. I mean, they are working on Unity for small things. I think that's promising, but when we started, we couldn't use Unity. So we looked for outsourcing solutions. And depending on your game, I think there's a bunch of different tools and solutions that are the right fit. So if you have something very small, like hyper-casual, you can probably recreate it like verbatim in web languages pretty easily. If it gets a bit more complicated, there are plenty of great editors out there. So yeah, Unity for small things, Phaser, Default. We actually built a tool in-house. And something important to note is interactive video probably is a good solution if you have a very complex game, something maybe in 3D or very action-orientated, or lots of layers of gameplay. So I just want to talk about, outsourcing your options. So these are some outsourcers that will build you a playable ad and deliver it, and you get to own the code and all the data. And these are people we've worked with, very highly recommended. Another popular option is licensing. So there are people offering services which they will create a playable ad and they will iterate on it for you as you go, and they'll give you feedback. But this is more of a license-based pricing model. Okay, sorry, I got a little mixed up here. Jumping back to our interactive video example. So it's a great solution for some games, I think. So if you want to see a good version of it well done, I think Contest of Champions is a really good example. You can play it on the Play Store. Now, how it works is it's basically rendered video wrapped in HTML. So players see a clip, they're prompted to press a button, and then that moves them through the action. And it can be a very it works really well for on-rails experiences, the way you just want to communicate a ton of cinematic experiences. So wonderful for some games. If you have a game where you need to give the player a bunch of choices, so this is a hidden object game where the player can choose any one of those 3 objects in any order that they want, then you need to cater for that with different versions of the video clips. And when you start to expand this gets pretty unwieldy, and you can see that maybe this wasn't the best choice for our production here. Why I'm highlighting this is there are a lot of solutions out there, and there's a lot of, almost everyone I've met have told me that they can make playables very easily for me, and I've always encountered challenges. So make sure the solution that you're going with is going to be the best one for your game and what kind of creative angle you want to go for. Okay, Assumption number 4, one-click publishing. This is a quick one. When you have a video, take the same video, you put it to all the networks, super easy. For playable ads, there's actually a lot of different cases you have to handle per network. So again, I'm not going to read this, but it's just supposed to be a snapshot to give you an overview of kind of how many different things you have to consider. If you are going to be responsible for producing the playable ads in your company, I recommend that you're at least familiar with everything that's listed on the left there, because it's going to help you solve problems as we go. Okay, assumption number 5, live ops light. We had the strategy to run playable ads like we do games in live ops, so lots of iterations, lots of testing, and actually we got one right. This is working really well for us. So, but we do need to make some changes for working with marketing departments. So first, in the first section, we worked on the in-game ones. Let's spend some time looking at the metrics on the outside of this graph. So the first measure of success would be, can you scale it? If a playable ad is not working, you're going to find out quite quickly because you will not be able to spend all your budgets. So if you can spend all your budget, then great, it's going to be working. We always measure how our playable ad is performing against our best video. It seems to be the way to make sense because playable ads are more expensive to produce. This is a benchmark standard provided by Liftoff. Ours look different, yours will look different as well, but make sure the point is use video as a reference. And then when you're drilling into the numbers, use both the UA side metrics, so how much did it cost, what was your ROAS like, and also on the other side, what kind of users were you getting and how did they perform. So for example, this is a Christmas themed ad we did for Pearl's Peril. We set a video benchmark with a similar themed video, and the playable ad performed roughly around the same in terms of IPM, though the ROAS was much higher, though our retention was a little bit lower, and our ARPDAU was about on par. The point is, depending on what your strategy is at any given time, you're going to want to be looking at different metrics for how to evaluate whether or not your playable ad was essentially worth it or not. Okay, some quick takeaways. Playable ads take a lot of different skills. Make sure you have buy-in from different stakeholders. Don't underestimate how difficult it is to keep it extremely simple, stupid. Make sure you do your correct R&D on your production solutions and choose the right ones for you. A little technical knowledge goes a long way for anyone involved in the playable ads production. Measure what you can and what counts. We still believe that the future is interactive. We still believe there's a lot of opportunity in this, even if we can't prove some of those more exciting metrics at this time. And one thing that I didn't really get a touch on, which I'm hoping you'll let me, I think we've got enough time, so bonus round. Okay, so another quick show of hands. Who wants to play and who wants to exit? I know it's probably a silly question at the end of the day. Okay, I'm going to assume, okay, option A. Yes, thanks guys, cool. That's good because both options actually go to the next one. This is just the beginning. As I really believe this is the future of mobile advertising. Just a quick example of where we could go with this. Assume you have 5 player profiles that you want to market to, and they're all going to respond to different marketing messaging. The way to do this would be to create 5 different videos, and you're still not even then 100% sure that these are going to land. With an interactive video, with a playable ad, you can give players the choice. Hey, how are you feeling today? How do you want to be marketed to today? Are you up for some action, or do you want something more relaxing? And if they say, hey, I want some action today, I'm feeling like I want some action, then you show them some action. You show them the exciting, explodey parts of the game, and they're going to love it. Or they say they want something relaxing today, and then you show them a different part of the same experience, and they are going to love it. And the one thing that I really wanted to communicate today was how powerful this potentially could be. So if you were paying attention, then that's kind of how I built this whole presentation, by asking you what kind of messaging you wanted to be listening to today. And that's pretty freaking meta, right? So I hope you enjoyed it and it all made sense. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, I think we've got some time for some questions. Oh, yeah, we're hiring, so please check out wooga.com.jobs. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. Thank you all both. It was very nice. I have a question for Peter. Peter, when you do the soft launch in terms of targeting, some specific games might have some audience that you have some inclination that they might enjoy the game better, or you know that some genres relate to certain audiences. Do you do any specific targeting, or try to do something that's very broad so you can have a few?
That's a great question. Well, I prefer to start with interest targeting to tap into the most relevant users and basically explore if the game is appealing for the ideal player. But to be honest, I talked to Pavel from Miniclip, and he mentioned that they are going totally broad, almost no targeting, just male 18 to 40, that's it. And their perspective is that they want to see how the general public responds. I think it's a matter of the game, because if you have really casual type of PvP game, and they do, like Agario, for example, it makes sense for them. But for me, and let's say Payday, or games which are focusing on certain audience, my approach with interest targeting, later lookalikes, make more sense. So it really depends on the product, I would say.
Thank you.
Hey, hello. Well, thanks both guys for the talk. And I have a question for Tim. So maybe I've missed it, but so far, do you have any evidence that playable ads are really worth it?
Right. Yeah, great question. This is the one we expected to come up. Can we prove it? No, not substantially right now, not significantly. The results are a really mixed bag at the moment. There are so many moving parts to playable ad production. I just focused on the actual unit here, but there's also challenges around how you're going to set up your campaign. So we've had some playable ads that came nowhere close to their video counterpart, but then we've had others which are performing extremely well. So I'd say on average, yeah. But yeah, no, not consistently. We haven't nailed that down yet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, Tim, fantastic presentation. It was very meta. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got my questions for Peter actually. So, Peter, if you don't mind, sorry about that. If you don't mind, you mentioned about the time zones, right? Like we've got 4 time zones, and we talked about 250,000 for a soft launch, marketing basis wise. So, would it make sense if you approach local distributors or partners to pick up those costs on those different regions where you do a revenue share model, and you don't have to spend that much money out of your own pocket, but you give away from some of your revenue, like for a year or two or whatever and whatnot. Like, would a model like that work?
And does your question relate to soft launch or the
soft launch?
Soft launch. Well, I think the main reason why you are soft launching is to learn and optimize. And you want to have as much control as possible, because still there are so many unknowns that it's overwhelming. So I prefer to go after the most obvious channels, such as Facebook, AdWords, video networks, to really focus on the basics, to see how the game performs, what are my KPIs, how I'm meeting my KPIs, what's the, let's say, click-through rate of the ad, install rate, what's the LTV, etc. So I would recommend to keep it as simple as possible, because there are still so many things you need to explore and calculate, that having such model will add an extra layer of complexity. And maybe for the post-launch.
Yeah, for the post-launch, what are your thoughts?
Then it could make sense. We have been in the position of the agency in relationship to a client offering us a rev share model, But to be honest, it's very difficult to define the relationship so it's fair for both sides. But I think that, for example, the specific case was e-commerce. There it makes sense. In the game, the game evolves over time. You are tapping into, live ops or changing the game on the go. So it's very difficult to fix some rev share model because the thing evolves over time.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions? Cool. So thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Great.
Well done.